It begins, as many cases do, with a body. On the morning of October 12, 2016, in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio, a jogger found something that would shatter the sense of safety the community had always taken for granted. She had been running along a narrow path beside the small wooded park near Franklin Avenue, a routine she followed every weekday morning. At first, she thought what she saw ahead of her was a mannequin. The way the figure was positioned, slumped against the trunk of a maple tree, legs splayed awkwardly, head tilted back, made her think someone had simply discarded a Halloween decoration. But as she approached, the awful truth became clear. It was not plastic, it was flesh, and the face was smiling. The victim was a man in his late 20s, dressed in business casual attire, a pale blue button-down shirt, khakis, a black leather belt. His shoes were neatly tied, but his shirt was torn at the collar. More disturbing than the violence itself, however, was the expression carved into his features. His lips had been pulled back into a grotesque grin, unnaturally wide, unnervingly forced. Later, investigators would determine that the expression was not natural. It had been manipulated. Someone had cut into the corners of his mouth to create that permanent smile. The media would soon give the unknown killer a name: the Smiling Man. Detectives from the Columbus Police Department arrived quickly. The lead investigator, Detective Sarah Conway, had worked homicide for more than a decade. She was not easily shaken, but even she admitted later in court testimony that this scene unsettled her in ways most cases did not. The victim's eyes were wide open, glassy, fixed on the canopy of branches above. His body showed no immediate signs of struggle. There were no defensive wounds on his arms or hands. It was as if he had been taken completely by surprise, or paralyzed in fear. The forensic team began their work methodically. They photographed every angle of the body, the surrounding ground, the tree bark, even the overhead branches. They collected fibers from the victim's clothing, swabs from his fingernails, soil samples from beneath his shoes. The path where he had been found was only 50 yards from a residential street, yet nobody had reported hearing screams the night before. The only sound neighbors recalled was laughter, brief, sharp, echoing in the still night air. The victim was soon identified as Michael Harris, aged 29, a mid-level accountant at a local insurance firm. He had left work the previous evening around 6:15 p.m., according to building security footage. He was seen walking to his car, a silver Toyota Camry, parked 2 blocks from his office. The car was later found abandoned near his apartment complex, suggesting he had made it home, or at least close to it, before encountering his killer. When detectives interviewed his colleagues, they described Harris as quiet, diligent, unremarkable. He kept to himself, rarely socialized, never caused trouble. Friends painted a similar picture. He was a man of routines. Wake up, go to work, return home, watch television, go to bed. He had no known enemies, no criminal connections, no history of disputes. And yet, he was now the first known victim of a murderer who would terrorize the city for months. The autopsy was chilling. The cause of death was asphyxiation. Specifically, pressure applied to the throat. The cuts around the mouth had been inflicted post-mortem with precision, suggesting the killer wanted to create that smile as a signature. There was no evidence of sexual assault, no drugs in the victim's system, no indication of robbery. His wallet and phone were left untouched. The motive, if there was one, was not financial. What drew even more concern was a discovery made under ultraviolet light, faint traces of fluorescent paint on the victim's shirt. It was speckled, almost like spray or splatter. No one could explain it at first, but it would become important later. Detective Conway gave a press conference 2 days later. She kept her language measured, professional, careful not to incite panic. But the press needed a name, and they found it in the details leaked by an anonymous source. The Smile. Within hours, headlines read, "The Smiling Man Stalks Columbus." For the public, it was a horrifying story. For the police, it was the beginning of a nightmare. The police station was silent except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Detective Sarah Mills sat in front of the interrogation room, watching through the one-way glass. Inside sat John Keller. The man they suspected was the Smiling Man. His hands rested calmly on the table, his posture relaxed, and his lips curved into that unsettling smile. He had been sitting like that for almost an hour, saying nothing, only occasionally tapping his fingers in a rhythm that seemed rehearsed. The victims haunted the city. 6 people, different ages, different backgrounds, but all murdered in a strangely ritualistic way. No signs of robbery, no sexual assault, nothing that fit a traditional motive. Just cold, calculated deaths, and one chilling similarity. Every single crime scene had a mirror placed nearby, and carved into the mirror, in uneven letters, was the phrase, "Smile with me." Sarah entered the room, sitting across from John. She placed a folder on the table but did not open it. Instead, she leaned forward and said quietly, "Why the smile, John?" He didn't blink, because smiling is honest. People lie with words, but not with a smile. That was the first sentence he had spoken since his arrest. Sarah noted his tone, steady, calm, almost soothing. But underneath it, she sensed calculation. Psychologically, killers like John often created a persona, a mask they wore to interact with the world. In his case, the smile was not an expression of joy, but a shield, something to unsettle others while keeping his true emotions hidden. The police had little hard evidence. A blurry CCTV capture, some fingerprints too smudged to be conclusive, and the testimonies of terrified witnesses who recalled only the smile. But Sarah knew something about John's psychology could unlock the truth. She decided to push. You choose victims who live alone. You follow them, you study them, and when you strike, you make them smile with you. Why? What does the smile mean to you? John tilted his head. Do you know what loneliness feels like, detective? Real loneliness? Not the kind where you miss a friend, but the kind where you feel invisible, where you walk past people and they don't even glance at you, where your existence means nothing. When I see lonely people, I give them a gift. I give them a smile, and they give me one back before they go. Sarah's pulse quickened. In that moment, his words revealed the pattern. He wasn't choosing randomly. He was selecting victims who were isolated, people society overlooked. The mirror was symbolic. He forced them to confront themselves, to face the reflection of their solitary lives. The carved words, "Smile with me," were not taunts, but invitations, twisted but consistent with his worldview. From a forensic psychology perspective, John fit the mold of a power control killer. He derived satisfaction not just from the act of killing, but from the psychological domination before the murder. Forcing a smile was his ultimate control, bending his victim's final moments into his narrative. Sarah excused herself and joined her partner, Detective Harris, outside the room. "He's not denying it," Harris said. "No," Sarah replied, "but he won't confess either. He sees this as art. Each victim is a brushstroke. To him, explaining it would ruin the masterpiece." The FBI's behavioral unit was brought in to consult. They confirmed Sarah's assessment. John was a narcissistic sociopath with strong traits of antisocial personality disorder. He lacked empathy, displayed shallow emotions, and used charm, or in this case a smile, to manipulate. But there was something deeper. His reference to loneliness hinted at early trauma. They dug into his past. Records showed a broken childhood. His father abandoned the family when he was 5. His mother, battling depression, often locked herself in her room, leaving young John alone for hours, sometimes days. Neighbors recalled seeing him sitting on the porch, smiling at strangers who rarely smiled back. That was where the seed had been planted. Neglect had shaped his worldview. Smiles became his currency of connection. Psychology teaches that trauma, when unresolved, can manifest in distorted coping mechanisms. For John, the smile became both armor and weapon. In adulthood, isolation magnified his pathology, and soon his smile ritual turned deadly. Back in the interrogation room, Sarah tried a different approach. Instead of accusing him, she empathized. "John, I think I understand. You don't want to hurt people. You want them to see you, to share a moment. Isn't that right?" His eyes lit up for the first time. "Yes, they see me. In the mirror, we are the same, 2 lonely people smiling together." Sarah knew then that he was on the edge of confession. The key was validation. Criminal psychology often reveals that killers with narcissistic traits crave recognition, even if twisted. She leaned closer. "Then help me see it too. Show me your truth. Tell me how it started." And he began to talk. He described his first experiment. A neighbor, an old woman who rarely left her home. He watched her for weeks, noticing she never received visitors. One night, he knocked on her door with a smile. When she smiled back, he felt a rush of connection. But when she quickly shut the door, the emptiness returned, sharper than before. So he waited until she was alone again. He brought a mirror, made her look into it, and demanded she smile. When she did, he felt whole, until her life faded, and the smile was gone forever. "Do you know what happens when they stop smiling, detective?" John whispered. "The silence comes back, and I can't stand the silence." That was his compulsion. He wasn't killing for money, revenge, or even sadistic pleasure. He was killing to silence his own loneliness, to create fleeting moments of connection that only death could freeze in place. The confession gave them enough to hold him, but Sarah knew this was not just about John. It was about understanding the psychology behind such darkness. Why some people, crushed by loneliness, turned inward and hurt only themselves, while others, like John, turned outward and created victims. Criminal psychology often highlights three core factors: environment, personality, and trigger. For John, the environment was neglect, the personality was narcissistic and obsessive, and the trigger was rejection, the endless cycle of being unseen. Combined, it created the smiling man. The case shook the city. Media painted John as a monster, a ghost with a grin. But Sarah kept thinking about something he said. People lie with words, but not with a smile. She wondered if, in his distorted way, John believed he was giving his victims a gift, even as he destroyed them. In the end, John was convicted, life imprisonment with no chance of parole. But prison walls could not contain his legend. Whispers spread among inmates about a man who never stopped smiling, who stared at mirrors for hours, as if waiting for someone inside to smile back. For psychologists, his case became a study in the weaponization of loneliness, a reminder that isolation, untreated trauma, and unchecked pathology could twist something as innocent as a smile into a symbol of fear. For Sarah, it was personal. She learned that behind every crime, there is not just evidence, but a story, a human story, however horrifying. And understanding that story was the only way to stop the next smiling man before he was born. The city had begun to whisper his name like a curse. The smiling man was no longer a story reserved for late-night bar talk or obscure crime forums. His shadow stretched into newspapers, news channels, and even the frightened conversations of ordinary families locking their doors tighter each evening. With 3 confirmed murders and at least 2 disappearances linked to his distinctive calling card, the grotesque grin carved into the victim's face, fear was no longer abstract. It was real, palpable, and everywhere. Detective Harris had not slept properly in weeks. His office was cluttered with photographs, scribbled notes, crime scene diagrams, and psychological profiles that never quite seemed to fit. Each victim appeared unrelated: a middle-aged accountant, a college student, a retired nurse. No obvious connection, no shared circles, no financial motive. The only thread was the smile, the cruelly exaggerated arc etched into each face, frozen forever in a mockery of happiness. Criminal profilers had a term for this: signature. Unlike a motive, which could change depending on circumstance, a signature was a psychological necessity. It was ritual, compulsion, an act the killer had to perform to feel whole. The smile was not simply decoration, it was communication, a message. But to whom? The FBI's behavioral analysts suggested sadism, mixed with theatrical tendencies. The smiling man was not killing merely to kill, he was performing. Each crime scene was staged, carefully designed for maximum impact, as if his audience extended beyond law enforcement to the public itself. He wanted people to see his work. He wanted fear to spread. But there was something else, something Harris couldn't shake. In every staged grin, in every victim posed under artificial lighting, he felt a deeper obsession, a fixation with the concept of happiness. Why happiness? Why parody it in such a grotesque form? Forensic psychologist Dr. Emily Cross believed the answer lay in early trauma. Many serial offenders with sadistic tendencies carried scars from childhood: abuse, neglect, humiliation. Some were forced to smile through pain, others punished for expressing negative emotion. Over time, the act of smiling could mutate in the mind into a symbol of control, dominance, or revenge. If the smiling man had been forced into false happiness as a child, perhaps now he was forcing it upon others, permanently, violently. The investigation deepened when the 4th body appeared. This time, the victim was not killed in an alley or abandoned building. The body was discovered in a motel room, carefully staged. The walls were covered in photographs, each one showing strangers in everyday life. Candid shots. A woman buying groceries, a man boarding a bus, a child at a playground. Each photo had one detail altered. The mouths were drawn into wide, exaggerated smiles with a black marker. On the dresser lay a note, "Happiness is mandatory." For investigators, this was a shift. The killer was evolving. The inclusion of strangers' photographs meant he was watching the city, cataloging its people, preparing potential victims. He wasn't just killing at random anymore, he was building a collection, a theater of suffering. Dr. Cross warned the task force, "This escalation is significant. He is moving from physical domination to psychological warfare." The message suggests he no longer kills just for himself. He kills for us, the audience. In his mind, he's teaching society a lesson. The pattern was eerily similar to real-world offenders like Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, who sought notoriety by taunting the police, or Jack the Ripper, who turned his killings into a citywide panic through cryptic letters. The smiling man wasn't content with silence. He wanted dialogue. He wanted to be part of the city's consciousness. And then he delivered. A package arrived at the police station, addressed directly to Detective Harris. Inside was a small video camera and a USB drive. The drive contained a single video file. The footage opened in darkness. Slowly, a dim light revealed a bound man sitting in a chair, his mouth forced open with crude metal hooks. Standing behind him, hidden mostly in shadow, was the silhouette of the smiling man. His voice was calm, almost gentle. People forget how to smile. They wear masks of sadness, boredom, rage. But a true smile, that is eternal. I give them eternity. The victim whimpered as the killer stroked his face. The video ended abruptly. Law enforcement recognized the tactic, communication with the authorities. Many killers who reached this stage craved interaction. It validated their power, proved their superiority. But with each communication came risk, mistakes, slip-ups, traceable evidence. The forensics team scoured the footage. No clear face, no identifiable background, just a faint hum in the audio track, machinery, possibly a ventilation system. A clue, but a small one. Meanwhile, the city spiraled. Rumors swirled online. Some claimed the smiling man had a manifesto. Others insisted he was a disgruntled actor, rejected by the world. Fear merged with fascination. Hashtags trended. Dark web forums treated him like an icon, dissecting his work as if it were art. This phenomenon wasn't new. Criminologists call it the cult of the killer, when a murderer becomes more than human, elevated into myth by the very terror they inspire. From Charles Manson to Zodiac, society has a morbid tendency to romanticize its monsters. The smiling man understood this. He was feeding it. Detective Harris knew they were running out of time. The killer was escalating, seeking larger stages, bolder acts. Statistically, once a serial offender reached this level of communication and performance, the killings would accelerate. The body count would rise, and the violence would intensify. And Harris feared something else, something buried in the photographs found in the motel. Among the dozens of altered faces, one image stood out. It was his wife, leaving their home, unaware she had been watched, photographed, cataloged. The smiling man had entered his world. The trial of Ethan Merrow began on a gray morning in late October. Outside the courthouse, a line of reporters and onlookers stretched around the block. The city, once terrified by a faceless figure in the shadows, now wanted answers. They wanted to see the man whose smile had haunted their nightmares. When Ethan entered the courtroom, handcuffed and guarded, the crowd gasped. He looked ordinary, no monstrous figure, no shadow-dwelling phantom, just a pale young man with sharp cheekbones and eyes that darted across the room like a predator surveying its territory. But when he sat down, chained at the wrists, his lips curled into that familiar grin, the same smile victims had described before their deaths. Dr. Morgan sat in the front row, observing. To her, the trial wasn't just about punishment, it was about understanding. She wanted to peel back Ethan's mind layer by layer, to reveal what made him. Was he a product of trauma? A chemical imbalance? Or was he proof that evil could exist without cause? The prosecution painted Ethan as a cold-blooded killer who derived pleasure from control and terror. They replayed footage of him walking past security cameras, always smiling. They showed photographs of crime scenes, victims arranged neatly, objects placed deliberately. Each murder was not chaos, it was choreography, Ethan's ritual. But the defense had their own angle. They brought in experts who claimed Ethan suffered from severe dissociation, that he was a product of neglect and abuse, that he didn't understand right from wrong. They wanted to portray him not as a monster, but as a broken human being. When it was time for Ethan to speak, the courtroom hushed. He leaned into the microphone, the smile never leaving his face. His voice was calm, steady, almost soothing. "I never wanted to kill," he began. "I wanted to study people, to see what they became when fear consumed them. Do you know what fear does? It strips away the masks. It shows who people really are." And I smiled because I was the only one who understood. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. The judge ordered silence, but the tension only grew heavier. "Dr. A." Morgan scribbled in her notebook. Ethan's words were chilling, but they were also revealing. He wasn't driven purely by sadism. He was obsessed with truth. To him, murder was not an end, but a method. His victims were experiments, and his smile was the signal that the experiment had begun. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. Ethan Merrow was sentenced to life without parole. Relief swept across the city. The smiling man would never walk free again. But for Dr. Morgan, the story was far from over. She requested permission to continue interviewing Ethan inside prison. She needed to understand the psychology of someone who didn't kill for revenge, money, or passion, but for knowledge. In their first prison session, Ethan sat across from her, shackled. He tilted his head and smiled. "You think you'll find answers in me," he said softly. "But the real question is, how many more like me are out there, watching, waiting, smiling?" Dr. Morgan felt a chill crawl up her spine. His words were not a confession, but a warning. And as she walked out of the prison that night, the lights flickering above her, she wondered, was the smiling man truly locked away, or had his legacy just begun?